I know. Hello, everyone, and welcome to A QISSAA with Ishika, quintessential and inspiring stories of South Asian artists, now on its 22nd episode, funded by the California Arts Council Individual Artist Fellow Grant. My name is Ishika Muchal, and I'm coming to you from the unceded ancestral lands of the Gabrielino Tongva people, also known as Los Angeles, California. I am beyond thrilled to introduce to you my guest today, director, screenwriter, and producer Nisha Ganatra. A Golden Globe winner and Emmy nominee, she was ranked as the #1 director globally by Cannes and won the Cannes Lions Grand Prix for filmcraft direction for her film #Womb Stories. She has directed, written, and produced movies including Late Night with Mindy, Kaling, and Emma Thompson, The High Note with Tracee Ellis Ross and Dakota Johnson, Chutney Popcorn with Jill Hennessy and Sakina Jaffrey, which she was also in, and Cosmopolitan with Kane and Roshan. She has also directed and written for TV shows like Girls, Mr. Robot, Transparent, Dear White People, Future Man, Shameless, Black Monday, Brooklyn Nine-Nine, Last Man on Earth, Welcome to Chippendales, and Dear Edward. The list goes on. Graduating from UCLA and NYU TISCH, she has created a platform for South Asians, women, and the LGBT community through her films. I am so incredibly honored to welcome Nisha Ganatra.
Hi.
Hi, thank you so much for joining me. It's an honor to have you here.
Oh, thank you for including me.
Of course. So let's get started with early on in your life. What was your first interaction with art and film in particular?
Oh, my gosh. I think my first interactions were, Bollywood films with my mom and my dad. Just they were constantly on in the house, and it all seeps into you without even realizing it. It just becomes the sort of fabric. And I think, trips back to India, we would always go to the cinema, and it was such a big outing and such a part of the culture, like
Right.
I love that like Indian audiences are so knowledgeable and so filmic and so like cinephiles, like just the regular everyday person. I remember like going to um, Mumbai in 2004, and the car that was driving us to the festival had to pull over at the gas station, and the guy who was filling the gas at the gas station knew the box office of the latest film and like was,
Oh, wow.
and I was like, this city is amazing. Like everyone
Yeah.
just knows everything and is following it also completely with such like a
Yeah.
beautiful, I don't know. I think it just made me realize this was an art and not, in America, it wasn't, and still isn't sort of treated as an art. It's kind of like
Right.
commerce or show business, but it was
Yeah.
pretty cool. Yeah.
Yeah, that's incredible. I think all of us growing up really got immersed into the Bollywood scene. So
Yeah. If we're
you're
lucky, I
saying,
mean, totally.
yeah, definitely seeps in like you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, and what made you decide that you wanted to pursue it as a career?
Um, God, I think I was sort of that first generation, so it wasn't really a legit career in a way. Like there
Mm.
were, of course, Bollywood movies, but they were made by the dynasties of the Kapoors and the families that like got to do
Right.
it. There wasn't sort of that connection. I came from
Right.
where, my parents had immigrated to find a better life, and like my mom
Right.
was a ICU nurse, and my dad was an engineer, so it sort of was a more traditional like expectations of how are you going to take everything we have given up to give you and go even further in the careers of law, engineering, or medicine. And so I think
Right.
I didn't know. I just was taking acting classes on the side when I was in high school. I was really
Mhm.
interested in it. And looking back, I can see I was always trying to tell stories, like, or even, when you go back to your school projects and you're like, oh, why did I make a film instead of, or like a video for that class instead of writing a paper? Or why didn't I,
Oh, yeah.
like find all the ways that you were sort of all along trying to tell stories. Like I found like even in 6th grade, we had to like write a book or write a story, and it was all like little like animation cells. Like I was trying to make a film strip even then, So looking back, I can say, oh, I was always trying to do this, but I think consciously I didn't until my last year of college. My roommate, thank God, she said, hey, why are you applying or thinking of law schools? Like you seem to be really passionate about film. And I was like, oh, I am, but that's not a thing you can do, And she was like, no, you're sneaking into all the film classes. You're like doing double credits because you're essentially doing 2 majors without doing 2 majors. And then she took me to like the internship board and said, why don't you get a job at a film company and see what what it's like. So so thankfully I had this really amazing roommate who kind of encouraged that. And then I got an internship at a production company that was doing music videos. And it was just so cool and exciting. And I started looking at, who's the person that gets to tell the story and bring it all together. And it was the director. And there was no way to kind of work your way up to becoming a director on the sets. It seemed like you had to. I mean, I'm so glad I did all that, so I knew how they worked and what to do. But I then went to film school to kind of jump right to the position of director.
Yeah. And you went to film school at NYU TISCH, correct?
I did. Yeah, I went to NYU. It was sort of I just figured I should go to the best film school I could get into, and that at the time was ranked #1. And it turned out to be really lucky timing because Christine Choi had just become the chair of the department, and she started a company called Third World Newsreel, which she was pretty groundbreaking woman, and she insisted that the class of filmmakers coming into NYU be 50% women for the first time ever. And that was like,
that's
not
huge.
so long ago, like late 90s. So for her to make that decision and for everybody to be like, what? This is so radical is insane. So we were the first class at NYU to be 50% female. And that was bananas when I say it out loud now.
Yeah, and you yourself have been such a big proponent of like gender equity and gender parity in film. Yeah. Can you talk about what inspires you about that and like what's the work that you've done around that?
Yeah, I mean, how exhausting that we still have to talk about gender equity and gender parity, right? Like how can we, I think, when I was in college, I was very involved with a feminist news magazine and learned about feminism and learned about gender equity all in college through this exciting time of sort of identity politics was just being taught and just coming up. And, the most shocking thing to me was we learned about feminism in college as if it were history, that like women had to go through all this to get the right to vote, and women had to go through this stuff to get, the right to even apply for a job or have a credit card on their own property, or all of that wasn't so long ago. It's like the 60s, like not so far back. And then to sort of enter the workforce and hit those glass ceilings and find that women were still making 70 cents on the dollar. And it was just sort of a big shock because it seemed like history, but it was actually currently happening and still is happening. And it just, I think it's just, a sense of justice. Like I think, growing up and going to Hindu temples and being told by my parents, girls and boys can do anything. And we used to go to Gurdwara every weekend. And I think there's a really like strong sense of social justice in the Sikh community as well. So I think it just, again, was ingrained from just mandir and like Gurdwara and like the sort of practices of my parents that everything should be equal and fair, even though, the more we learn nothing is. But I think it was that, just this innate sense of, and I had a big brother who could do things that I couldn't do. And I was always mad about it. I was like, I should be allowed to do everything he could do. So I think it was just, I think my mom kind of had the same vibe. Like she had big brothers and sisters family, and she ran away and came here and sort of did everything she wanted to do in life. And that feeling of you can work hard enough to give yourself the freedom to make choices for yourself was really put in me from, my grandfather who sent my mom to school at the time. She was the only girl at the boys' school because he felt like she should have the education the boys had too.
Yeah.
So I think it's like just something that I didn't even know have a word for until recently, when we could say gender equity and gender parity. It was just
Okay.
sense of what's right and what's fair for everyone, for my son too. Like I now have a little girl, and so I want to like make sure the world is better for her. But my son also sees that it's not right to have privileges, that it's not good for anyone, even the people benefiting.
Right. And like you were saying, I think it just requires one person to be bold enough to make that step, to make that change. And I know that many times, like looking at your work and like how you assemble your team of collaborators, you've really done that, like making sure that you have like a female cinematographer and female AD. So can you talk about like some of that process of how you look for collaborators? And as a follow-up to that, just like what steps do you think that the industry can take to further enhance that work towards gender equity?
Yeah, I mean, part of the problem is and also when I was first starting in Hollywood, like it's one thing to kind of do it in film school where you have control over everything. Then you get to Hollywood and everyone's like, here are your choices, and your choices never include people of color or a woman. And so the hard thing in the beginning was not having the language that I have now, that, it was like, well, here's one female DP, but her work doesn't hold up to the male DP's work. So, we're always just going to hire the phrase constantly used is the best person for the job, right? And the best person for the job is usually the person who's been doing it all along, or has had all the opportunities, or has been given all the resources. So in that model, I could never get a job. Nobody else could get a job. Like no one who hasn't been the traditional person doing it. So it was a big eye opener for me to like, I would look at DP reels from, let's say, from female cinematographers, and their reels would never look as good as the reels from the male cinematographers. And it wasn't a matter of talent, it was a matter of resources. So so when we finally said, well, let's meet this woman who shot this movie, and when we met her and we found out like she shot the whole movie with basically tin foil and a flashlight, and this other guy had 3 trucks of like equipment, it was like, well, what would this woman be able to do if we gave her this kind of equipment and time? And so, and of course she shot a beautiful film, so I think it was kind of that battle of fighting people when you don't have the proof in your hands to say she can do it. You can't, a lot of people don't want to hire you to do something unless they see that you've already done it. And that sort of catch-22 historically keeps out people of color and women. So it's really hard to like break that cycle with the people, but it's gotten a lot better. I mean, now when I go in rooms, the people behind the on the other side of the table who are hiring people are more female and more weirdly more South Asian. Like, and now there was a time where I felt like I knew every South Asian in Hollywood, and there were like 7 of us. And now it's always like, well, who are you? And what's that name? And where, whenever I watch something, I would write down if I see a South Asian name. And then before I meet them, I'm like, a lot behind the scenes, like a lot of executives and people at the networks, a lot of people developing movies are now South Asian. And it's so cool because you go in and the head of ABC right now is a woman named Simran Sethi. And I was pitching a series, and one of the storylines was Rocky, and she was like, oh yeah, and I realized like it was the first time I didn't have to say, so there's a holiday called Rocky, and this is what we do. And I could just talk in a way that I think other people have had the privilege and insider info to do, but we've always been outsiders. So it's cool that there are more South Asians behind the scenes, kind of, becoming the tastemakers and saying what comes on TV and what doesn't, and what gets through theaters and what doesn't. Because that's how I think will really change things. Like not just creating content, but being the people behind the scenes that can get that content seen.
Right, absolutely. I mean, I had done this article a few years ago and like had research from like the USC Annenberg. There was that survey and like the UCLA survey that they do about like diversity in film and TV. And it's the major component that's like holding us back right now is the people who actually greenlight the films and TV. Because it's like there's so many creators, like you're saying, those are abound, and like people who want to tell their stories, but like, will the people in power actually let them tell those stories?
Right.
Is kind of the issue now.
It's a huge issue. And then, even like when I did a show called Mr. Robot, it was the first time there was an Indian actress, a Muslim actress who was playing a Muslim character, and then there were two other parts to be cast, um, and I cast like there was an Indian actress who came in to read, and I thought she was fantastic, and I wanted to cast her, and I had a moment of, oh, there's already another Indian person. Are they going to let me? And I couldn't believe I was already like kind of censoring myself. And I was like, well, I'm just putting her name forward. And then they cast her. And then there was a part for a guy. And I wanted to cast this Indian guy because I was a software engineer. And I was like, I hate when I watch shows and there are no Indian doctors. Like, I don't think you can walk into one ER in the country and not see Indian doctors or Filipino nurses on television. And so I was so pissed off. And I was like, this guy's a software engineer. 99% of them are South Asian. Here's this actor, he's great, and he cast him too. And then I realized, like, oh my God, I have one episode with 3 South Asians in it. What's going to happen? And nobody batted an eye because the creator of the show was Egyptian. He didn't. It looked normal and right to him. And thankfully, that's how we could make that episode. And I realized, wow, so many episodes I would get pushback. Like, well, we already got one Black person. Oh, we already cast this one South. So now I just try to put every South Asian in everything I do until somebody says no, that's enough.
Yeah, I mean, it's sad that we still have to think about that as if it's like a diversity quota.
Yeah.
Because like, honestly, when you're casting, like you're talking about, you're just trying to represent the slice of life that you're trying to capture as authentically as possible. But like for the people casting and creating, it's like, oh, we've already got one of this.
Yeah.
That's not like how,
right? It's such a LA problem. Like I don't think it exists in New York that like people mix together more, right? Like you take the subway and you see all kinds of people. Like when I moved here, so I remember I was in New York at NYU and I was reading the story about how the NAACP was bringing a lawsuit against Hollywood. And it's because Hollywood just forgot to create any shows with people of color or Black characters in it this year and didn't cast anyone either. Not this year, but the year of that article. And I remember thinking, how in the world could they do that? And then I moved here and I realized how you can do that. And it's because, let's say if you work at one of these agencies in Beverly Hills and you live in, the Pacific Palisades, you can get in your car in the Pacific Palisades, which is very white, drive right through Brentwood, which is also very white, drive through Westwood, which is also super white, stay up there, get into Beverly Hills, come right down to your agency and never see one person of color, like not interact with any of them, not see any, not think about it. And that's impossible in New York City, right? Like there's no way you can do that there. And I just thought, oh, wow, everybody's sort of driving around in these little vacuums of their cars and they're not interacting with people and they're not seeing what the fabric of our country really is, So it's just the biggest problem and snow job too when when Trump was elected and they started saying, oh, all of you live in a bubble and the real America is this rural white small town. And I was like, and somebody from a really cool writer wrote a piece saying, like, actually, I'm not in a bubble. That's the bubble. Like, when I go to work every day, I interact with people from all ethnicities, all religion, all different backgrounds, all ages, all genders. The bubble is if you live in a small little white town, like, and you're not interacting with anybody else. That's not the picture of our country. Like, that's not the fabric of our nation right now. So you're living in this little weird bubble that's like, told you that this is normal, but this is not, so it's really interesting the sell job of, all you liberal diverse people have it wrong is like such nonsense to me.
I mean, this is what humans and humanity and us, like as a cross section of people, look like. So you personally, as a storyteller, how do you decide which stories that you want to tell? What inspires you when you're creating characters or plot lines?
I think it's, I still feel like there's so much work to do just in representation, but what's interesting to me is always like female-led stories, anything with South Asian content, obviously gets to the top of my list, anything having to do with issues of identity or that's always fascinating to me in every way. And then I tend to lean towards comedy because I think it's just, it's more fun basically to like, if you're going to spend your days like 12 hours a day trying to make something as funny as possible, it's really challenging and also really fun to do. Like you get to work with really sharp people in comedy, and it's just like joyful when everybody gets it right.
Yeah. Yeah, I love watching the stuff that you do because like there's like this element of like a subtle moral that's going through the entire show, but I never feel like I'm being force fed a moral. Like it's
Oh,
always
thank you.
comedic. Yeah, which is beautiful.
Yeah, comedy is a great way to be really political and not, like you're preaching or preach to.
Absolutely. And do you think that you've experienced like a difference in directing a screenplay that you've written versus directing a screenplay that is from another screenwriter?
Yeah, definitely. I think like, when I've written it, I see it so clearly in my head how it's going to go. So it's really different directing your own story. And, it's also acting in your own story is much easier than somebody
Right.
else's. That takes a really amazing amount of skill. And so I think that those things are um, innate in a way. Like, you're telling your story, you know how it wants to go, you know where the camera should be. When you're telling someone else's story or something someone else wrote, I try not to do it unless I have a personal connection to it, because otherwise I honestly don't know where to put the camera and how to do it, because it's so instinctual that if you are just telling a story that doesn't make any sense to you in any way, you're not going to be able to really direct it well. You're just going to do
Right.
a pretty generic job. So I think even in the TV shows, like I've read some that are great shows, but I was just like, I don't know how
Right.
this world is not for me, So it's kind of a weird thing where you just have to find something that personally resonates with you, or you have a reason to tell it,
Mhm.
or a reason, even if it's something like, I remember Disney was going to do like a Cheetah Girls movie, and it was set in India, and I didn't really want to do it, but then I read the script, and it was really full of cultural inaccuracies. And I
Ah,
was like, okay, I have to do this, because if I don't do it, somebody
yeah.
else is going to do it, and it's going to be really bad. And
Right.
so I took that screenplay to like rewrite it, because
Mhm.
it had like 5 leg camel jokes in like Mumbai, and I was like, there are no camels in Mumbai. Like I can't let this fly. Like this is not happening.
Yeah. That's incredible. You're basically serving as like a dramaturg as well
I
as a
know, right?
screenwriter. Yeah. Yeah.
I know.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I guess like in the way that you're telling stories, you kind of capture like this slice of life, especially like when we're looking at like Chutney Popcorn or Late Night. So I guess what draws you toward the aesthetics that you choose when creating films?
Oh, that's a really great question. I wonder. I think that I'll always push towards a more real aesthetic, even if it has
Mhm.
to be in a sort of beautiful Hollywood world. Like there's kind
Right.
of something between the two, like not as real as like a documentary or a mumblecore film,
Right.
but something very um, like I never want to see a kind like when I watch those sort of bigger campy like Ryan Murphy shows, I'm always like, I don't know what's going on here. Like you know what I mean? Like I never want to
Yeah.
see somebody kind of appearing in a big crazy costume that doesn't have to do with the character. Um,
Mhm.
and so those shows like feel very foreign to me. So I think the look is like, how can everyone look like the best version of themselves, but still like a real
Mhm.
person? Um, and then the aesthetic of the lighting and the design. I have like a really amazing designers that I collaborate with, so that they
Mhm.
come up with the color palette and the different like costumes. Like I think the one joy of film school is you really learn that it's a collaborative art. Like we pretend the director is the be all end all of movies, but there's nothing to direct without like actors and costumes and
Yeah.
line and light. So it's really, I really take seriously that idea that the department heads and I are all collaborating together to create the look of the character and the feel of the whole film. And I think like once I started doing that with more knowledge and more experience, everything got very elevated in the execution. Where if you just run around trying to do everything by yourself, it's never going to be better than what you can see, you know? So
Right. Right.
I think it's that. And then I have an amazing editor who is brutally honest with me and will just say, this isn't funny. This didn't work. Everything you're trying to do, that didn't happen. And like just cut it out of the movie. And we'll fight so much in the editing room. I'll be like, we'll just try it. We'll just do this. And she's just so hardcore, just says, you know, and I trust her taste so much that if she says something doesn't work, I just leave it on the floor, even if it's painful.
Sure.
So I think there's, you know, that kind of thing. And also, I'm always trying to be a little more subtle in the comedy. I learned a lot with Mindy, like watching her work so hard. Like she is such a hard worker, and she would work a joke and work a joke and work. I mean, to this day, she would say, "I wish like I could have redone this joke and that joke in late night," you know. And um, you know, the painful side of that is nothing's ever good enough. But the amazing side of it is, you know, like for example, when she had that scene where she walked up and said the quote from the poem about like it's looking at the late night sign. We rehearsed it, and she said, "I just feel like a trash bag or something should just hit me in the face after I say this. Like it's so awful." And I was like, okay, let's do it. Like let's try it. I'm not going to say no to some physical comedy, and if you don't like it, we could cut it out later. And so she just had this great instinct for this, like to undercut that moment of sincerity with this like over the top kind of bananas moment of being hit with a trash bag.
Right.
And I think she's just so sharp at comedy and knowing and collaborating with brought in, you know, the top people to kind of sift through their pitches and their ideas and put through into like her story what was strongest. So it was just cool to watch her just never stop working and keep trying to beat the jokes, you know?
Yeah.
And
And
like Brooklyn Nine-Nine is the same way. Like they'll hand you a really funny script that you're shooting, and then at the same time they'll hand you a like packet of alt jokes that you just try to race through as many as you can, and all of them are funny. I don't know how Dan and the editors decide, and Andy probably. I don't know how they decide which ones go in the show and which ones don't, because they're all so freaking funny, you know. And you just see, and then even though they've handed you that and the script, there will still also be like 3 or 4 writers standing on set trying to beat those jokes as well. Like, so it's just like this crazy, amazing environment where you're like, wow, comedy writers work so hard.
Yeah. And I feel like with all of the work that I've seen you do and Mindy do, it's like nothing ever fails to land. So it's incredible that happens.
Oh, a lot fails to land. We just don't put it in the final.
Well, like in the final cut, nothing fails to land.
There's enough that lands that we can hide the other stuff. No, it's pretty awesome. I think that you know, it's just such a team of people bringing it all together. But it is really fun to make something land. You're right. Like it does come together in a way that you all like just feel like, yes, you know, we got it.
Right.
It's like the closest. I don't really watch sports, so I feel like the closest thing I experience to what people who love sports is like when that happens and we all cheer.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And you and Mindy and so many of these people are like the original South Asian trailblazers in the entertainment industry. And I'm wondering early on in your career and even now, because you said like you like to choose South Asian stories to tell, and there aren't that many people, or at least there weren't that many people doing that. Did you feel like this pressure, this burden of representation to like tell things authentically or tell things that everyone was able to relate to, or were you able to like really just narrow down to like this is what I want to do and I'm going to do it?
I don't think I ever tried to tell a story that everyone could relate to.
Okay.
I just tried to tell a really specific story, and I think with Late Night with Mindy, it was really like um, her sort of ode to hard work. Like it was sort
Mhm.
of obviously not her story working in a factory coming in, but she was like definitely
Right.
the only South Asian person in the room on The Office, and definitely
Mhm.
had those moments of feeling like the diversity hire and being told in so many ways that you don't belong here.
Mhm.
And so I
Yeah.
think there was, there were always those moments that weirdly, like even if you're expressing it on screen, behind the screen, you're still dealing with it.
Right.
Um,
Right.
but yeah, I think it's that lesson that everyone, we all keep learning over and over, and Hollywood keeps learning now for the first time. I think is that the more specific you are in your story, the more universal it is. So
Mm.
I remember learning that from like watching Margaret Cho's stand-ups, and she would do
Mhm.
these really specific jokes about her mom. And everyone would come up to her after a show and say, that's my mom. Your mom's like just like my mom. And I was watching her going, God, that is so specifically her mom.
Right.
And everyone's feeling like it's theirs. So
Mhm.
I think also in Chutney Popcorn, like everybody was like, "Oh my God, that was my mom," and I was like, "No, that
Yeah.
was my mom." But it was really very like serious lesson in the
Yeah.
more like you dare to kind of put your own real experience in life on the line. The interestingly, the more everybody relates to it.
Right.
Or if I tried to tell a super generic, we've seen them, right? Like we don't want to name check and take down any of those
Yeah.
movies, but we've seen those super generic, like Welcome to India movies, and we're all like,
Right.
ugh, boring. Like turn it
Yeah.
off.
Yeah. Yeah, because that's like an outsider lens, whereas like what you're saying, as specific as it is, the more relatable it is as
Yeah.
it is. And I think that's so powerful because I loved watching Never Have I Ever because it was so specific, but like I was still able to see myself in certain elements of it. And I remember tuning into this interview that Varsha Sharma from Teen Vogue was doing with Maitri, and I had like asked on like Twitter, and they had answered my question about like, do you feel this burden of representation? And she was like, initially she did, but then it's kind of unfair knowing that South Asians get like 5 stories and like everyone else gets like 100 stories
Yeah.
to try to expect those 5 stories to cover an entire diaspora is
It's
just
impossible.
it's
Yeah.
not going to happen. Yeah.
Never. Yeah. Which is
Yeah.
why we need more stories. And definitely, I mean, Mindy's
Yeah.
amazing and a great producer, but shouldn't be the only voice on Netflix of South Asian
Right.
stories. Like that's too
Right.
big a burden for her and for our community. Like we need more more diversity in the storytelling as well. So
Yeah.
yeah, I totally 100% agree with that. And there's also, I think if there are writers or content creators listening or watching this, the biggest advice is don't explain anything. Like, don't explain
Mhm.
South Asian. If you find yourself saying, like, this is what it's like to be Indian or this is what it's like to be South Asian, just
Mm,
move on, like, cut past that, like, just do the next draft beyond that. Because if you
mm,
start explaining yourself to anyone, you're already in the outsider lens. You're already you're lost.
mhm. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's such like a strong point of identity to speak from. And speaking of identity, did you ever early on in your career, did you feel like you had to change who you are to fit in or to like be successful in the industry?
Oh, yeah. I mean, not I think like the first wave of actors, everybody was told to change their names, like Cal Penn and
Mm,
I think definitely there was Nisha Ganatra, you're not going to get any work, and like that kind of vibe from the acting
mm,
side. But luckily because I went to NYU, there was no like change anything. The NYU was
mm,
very be an auteur, tell your story, tell it very deeply. Like,
mm,
you know, if I hadn't gone to NYU, I don't think I would have made Chutney Popcorn. Um, but but the thing that oddly I found that I had to hide or change to get work in the industry was I could not be pregnant. I like had to hide the fact that I was
mm.
pregnant when I was pregnant with my son, and
Wow.
then I had to, you have to consistently kind of lie about having children or young children if you don't. Like I know every female filmmaker I know pretends they don't have children when they interview for a job because the
Wow.
idea is men have children and they need to be breadwinners, but if a woman has children, they think you should be home with kids. So
Right.
that is so pervasive still in our culture that it
Yeah.
hinders you and it puts you at a disadvantage for getting a job. So yeah,
Right.
weirdly, we all still play this game of nope, I don't have any kids. And it's so painful and awful, that, but it's all part of the gender parity thing we're talking about, that
Mhm.
women still have to do this. Like CEOs still. Someone said this. Oh, Jessica, the writer of the project, the film I'm doing next,
Mhm.
she told me she read this great quote about our generation, which is we're expected to work like we don't have children and raise children like we don't have work. And that's like
Wow.
gospel task. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's such like a blatant dichotomy in how, like you were saying, how men and women are interviewed for jobs and
Yeah.
also interviewed when they have the jobs, like by the press. Like the questions that you are asked must be very different from like if you were a man.
Yeah, well, it's weird. I think there's still the female director question, but they've changed that a lot. The thing that I didn't think about that just was recently put in my head by Kieran Dale, this comedian, was she was like, I watch all the stuff from these other filmmakers, and I wonder what would have been like if right after Chutney Popcorn you were just given resources and support to make your next story, like. Because
Mm,
I was always trying to get a job to pay for things and support the family and do this. So what would it have
right.
been like if I could have just been an auteur filmmaker and just been like, no, I'm just going to make my next thing what I want to do, And that was such an interesting thing she was saying, like, you know, where's the sort of support for the female filmmakers to continue their journey without
Right.
having such a big gap between film one and film two?
Hmm. Hmm. And speaking of like the support, were like the people that you pitched your projects to, when you pitch them, because we were talking about how you're trying to write from like an authentic lens, especially when pitching to people who are not South Asian, were you ever like pressured to stereotype your stories?
I don't, I don't, I mean, sure, of course, everybody is, but I think I just don't entertain it. I cut it so quickly, like I knock it right at the first breath or even
Yeah.
like vibe of it. It's like I immediately clip that. So I think there's no. I'm never getting to the point where I'm actually writing and being told to do something stereotypical because in the initial
Mm.
phases, when it comes up as like, here's an idea, I'm like, no, like immediately no.
Yeah.
So it doesn't like get there,
Mhm.
but yeah, it's weird. Like we still have people doing like weird accents or fobby stereotypes or all that. I don't know.
Right.
I don't know when that stuff. It's so maddening. It's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah. Yeah. Because
I
it's
don't
not
blame
real.
actors because actors have to, they have so little power by the time they get the job
Mm.
that I don't fault the actors who are doing it. It's really the writers and the people behind the camera that are allowing it, because you do have
Right.
more power behind the camera to say, no, we're not doing this. This is bullshit.
Yeah. It's like, because as an actor, I can be like, no, I'm not going to do that. But then also that could mean
And you
that I'm
get
just
fired and
never going to make it
replaced.
work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're going to just find someone who can and that or will. And
Right.
that's no good for you in your career. Like you don't have,
Yeah.
until you're like, you know, I don't even know if Priyanka could do it. It'd be like, no, I'm not doing that. They'll be like, okay, fine, you're out. So,
Right. Yeah. That's sad to think that, like, no matter how high you get in the industry, you're still kind of subject to someone else's interpretation of someone who looks like you.
I know, right?
Yeah.
It is
Yeah.
I have to change that.
Yeah. And
Although right
speaking of
now, I feel like the climate is more that, like, when an actor says, "Hey, this accent it's not really from my region. It's not how anyone in my life sounds. Like,
right.
I think I should do it this way." More and more people who are not South Asian behind are like feel that they
Heard.
should
Yeah.
listen to that, um, but it's annoying that it even has to get to the point, and you have to hope there's an actor who will stand up to them and then be listened to, and
Yeah.
it's tough.
Yeah, definitely. And if you had like, I don't know, this is kind of like wishful thinking, but if you had like a magic wand or like if you had like power over the changes that are happening or are to happen in the entertainment industry, what are the things that you would like to see change, or what are the things that you think could be put into motion to create those changes?
I think the same things you were talking about, like just more diversity behind the camera and at the level of greenlight. Like that is, it's so cool that you identified that as like the biggest block, because that is, I mean, I remember even when I made Chutney Popcorn, I finally, I went to go meet with the independent companies that were in charge of what movies came out of film festivals and went into actual theaters. And there were 7, and they were all run by white men. So there were 7 white men who were deciding what films were so brilliant at the festival that they were going to put them into theaters. And what films do you think they chose? Of course they picked like the ones that were the most like them. Like, of course they launched the careers of every sort of amazing male director that they wish they were. It kind of went in this direction. So I feel like even now with like Kim Utani heading up Sundance and different, like the different programmers having more diversity, different films are coming into the top tier festivals, which means different opportunities for those people coming out of those festivals. Seeing more women behind the scenes and in exec roles and running studios is huge. I think it's just sort of everyone everywhere has to keep pushing forward on all fronts, because then the corporations have to, the marketing people, it all, how things are portrayed. Like I know there are still really what I consider massively misogynistic shows that are like, being shot and on TV and like consumed, and it's disappointing when our culture like keeps demanding it, so it's kind of, I guess, how do we wave that magic wand and ask people to demand better? Like, because it is like a weird system that they'll be like, well, we don't want to make those shows, but that's what audiences want. So audiences could be like, we don't want to watch those shows, but that's all we're given. So it does become a little feedback loop,
Yeah. And like, it's so statistically proven that audiences want shows with people of color and with women in them. Like, they sell in the box office. They're always like the top hits. So it's kind of
like, how many shows does Shonda have to make?
I know. Literally, it's such a contradiction.
It's like, what? This is such a
It's like the money is there. It will literally put money in producers' pockets. The same thing with
corporations, right? They find that corporations with more diverse, like workers and employee statistics do better. Like it's better for the whole company, but people still are holding on to like, no, it's got to be these white guys that stay in charge. And I'm like, why? Like, what is even against like the mighty god of capitalism? They're all going to say no. Like, it's such a weird instinct. I mean, it's all rooted in just, this white supremacy that's really hard to escape from this country. It's really, it's really pervasive all around, like there is this interesting, even when the, Academy started letting in more women and people of color, there was this, like you'll hear sort of men say, well, they're coming and they're taking our jobs. And there isn't the question of why is it your job to begin with? Like, what is this our jobs vibe? What is this language? And why are we assuming that we're the invaders and not the like also rightful, like, inheritors of this job? So it's such an interesting time where there's like this thread. And I think as like, we're approaching the year that we've all been waiting for when minorities aren't the minority in this country. There's like a super panic happening between the people who have historically had privilege and an easier ride, frankly. And I think that they're flipping out, like really flipping out. Doing all kinds of crazy things. I mean, like, but it's the same thing, like 83% of our country agrees with abortion access, and yet they passed a law to overturn it. Like, who is this like small vocal minority that is like getting their way when the rest of the country is sort of pushing into the future? There's this small minority keeping us pulled back in the past,
Yeah. Yeah, and going back to what you were saying about like the people coming in and taking the jobs, I
Yeah.
had a person that I knew who was white had told me a while ago when we were early on, this was like 2017, 18, and she was like, you know, it's really good to see like all the changes happening in the industry. Soon it's going to be all you people of color getting on the jobs and there'll be no jobs left for white like us white people. And I was like, I don't think that's ever going to happen.
No.
It'll just become proportional, if anything.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
And it's
those
not like anyone's discriminating against white people, like
right.
just by putting up a person of color, and that, like, there is that. But part of it is too, like, these agents, like the agents won't say to their like older white male clients, like, hey, you haven't really done anything to stay competitive, and your last
Mhm.
sample wasn't really, you know, inclusive in a way that allows you to
Right.
get staffed on these shows. Instead, they'll say, "Oh, they're not hiring white men right now. Oh, it's a hard time to be a white man right now." And then these guys
Mhm.
like hear that enough, and they take that in, and they really, it comes out as like anger and violence against
Yeah.
people of color for taking their jobs. But it's like the laziness of, and the fear of like management too, to just say,
Mhm.
stop doing that. Like, don't tell them
Yeah.
that's the reason. It's not like I got this job over that guy because I'm Indian. Like, that's never helped me get a job
Right.
over.
Yeah.
It's like maybe they need to like, diversify their portfolios as well, the same way
Right.
we could. But yeah, it's a really interesting thing. I mean, we all grew up in two cultures, so we can code switch and we can tell many stories.
Right.
But I think they didn't, so they don't know how. It doesn't occur to them.
Yeah, absolutely. And just going back to you, you have done so much work in the time that you've been working in the industry. Like you've had so many titles and so many films and TV projects and so many stories to your name. So I'm wondering, what does success look like and mean to you? And if you could choose, what would you want your legacy to be?
Hmm. Oh my God, I haven't thought about the legacy question.
If you don't know, that's okay.
I don't know. I mean, success, I think now would look like being able to tell the stories that I want to tell, and being given resources and opportunities to tell those stories.
Right.
I think that would feel like an amazing success, to just stop thinking about, okay, what can I do? And more like, what do I want to do?
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
that's like coming. It's sort of almost there.
Yeah.
But it's more like my own mindset. Like, I have to give myself permission to tell my own stories and
Right.
stop, like, hearing the voice that got put in from all the years of like being told no.
Right.
Um,
Right.
so yeah, I think there's that would feel like success if you didn't like
Yeah.
tell yourself no in any way.
Right. Just knowing that like what you want to say can be said and will be heard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Absolutely.
mean, I would love, my agenda for a couple years now has been to put a South Asian family in people's living rooms on a network TV show. And I would love that opportunity. Like, I've,
Yeah.
written a few versions, and hopefully one will go through, and it would like be great to like just have it be so normalized in people's rooms. And I think
Right.
that's sadly kind of radical, because people are so afraid of brown people right now still, that I'm just like, God, we have to like just get into the empathy machine that is television. And
Mhm.
like, and that's the only way we're gonna shift culture.
Right. And it's like they're afraid of us because they've only seen us in certain roles.
Yeah.
And the more that they see us as like an everyday person, the more that they're gonna understand that we are just them, just
Yeah.
brown. Yeah. I don't know how, but like other way to put it. Like we are
We're
all like the
not,
same.
like, we're not them, but that's okay.
Right.
Like, they shouldn't be
Yeah.
afraid of it, Like,
Right.
we're not
Right.
terrified. Well, we are a little terrified, but we're like, everyone needs to just sort of um, just know each other more, so they can't
Right.
leave each other so easily. I think
Yeah.
these pockets that everyone gets into is really dangerous for everyone.
Mhm. Yeah. And is there anyone or any like movie or any person or anything that has been really inspirational to you? Or I guess let me phrase it as this
Yeah.
show is called A QISSAA with Ishika, and QISSAA means like episode or story. So has there been a QISSAA in your life that has been incredibly influential to you?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, so many. So many. I mean, I think one thing that just stands out in this moment is I remember when we were going to India to play Chutney Popcorn at the festival, the film festival in Mumbai. And I was pretty terrified because prior to that, this movie Fire had come out and people were bombing theaters. And there was all this sort of, even in America, when the movie premiered, there was so little South Asian content that like all these uncles and aunties drove in to go to the theater. And I was terrified because I was like, oh my God, I made an indie film for like basically indie film lovers, not like
Yeah.
I wasn't meaning to like have all the South Asian representation of it. And so like I was so afraid of the reactions and what people were going to say. And there was this moment where we showed the film in Bombay, and I was sort of with my mom, and I was like, let's just sit at the back ready to run in case something happens.
Wow.
And it was so well received and so like open. Everyone's hearts were so open. And I was like, oh my God, this image that I have of India being this conservative place from here, like, you know, hearing the stories from that, it was so different. Like everybody was really open and really, you know, it's just that thing that you learn, like if you tell people your story, they can't hate you, you know? So it kind of
Yeah.
was this thing in it. And the uncles and aunties were so like proud of the representation and so
Yeah.
excited. And I think that really empowered me to say, okay, like I can just feel the, I don't know, you know how you just feel the weight of your community, like kind of um, pushing you up, like so I think
Absolutely.
like there was this moment too, like they had a sort of South Asian excellence party this last year, and I went, and I think, you know, Mindy and I both talked about this, and I said like I went thinking like, you know, I was one of the only ones in the room, only to like turn around and find there was a wave of people behind me kind of holding me up, and it was
Yeah.
pretty amazing feeling of like,
Yeah.
oh, like that hard work of trying to hold the door open and pull everyone else through, like
Right.
was not just me, but everyone was doing that, and everybody came through, and everybody like keeps pulling more in, which is pretty inspiring, and I think unique to our
Yeah.
culture to not sort of slam the door shut behind you and say, okay, I got in, no one else, there's no room, but to keep. It's like it's so stereotypical, but somebody told me a story once about the defining thing of India is like there's a train. Like if you've ever taken the train in India, you know the trains are
Yeah.
packed, right? Like
Yeah.
you cannot get on that train. Like even if you have a reserved ticket, like you just there's no room. And
Right.
yet, if somebody's running to catch that train, like 100 hands will go out to try to pull that person on, even though there's
Yeah.
no room. And I feel like that's sort of what we're doing in our industry. We're like, let's go, let's go, let's go. Everybody in, everybody get on the train. You know?
Yeah,
It's this
absolutely.
great feeling.
Yeah, it's like bringing people into the door and finding a seat at the table, and if the table's not working, you make a bigger table.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And what projects are you working on right now that you can share with us?
What can I share? A new series called Deli Boys, which is like this
Okay.
Pakistani American series, which is pretty awesome. It's very, very out there. Like it's definitely going to challenge our images and thoughts of um, South Asians because it's these two, you know, boys. One of them is like, you know, not shy about his love for marijuana and pots and bongs and dabbing and all of that. The
Yeah.
other one is like, you know, trying to be the good kid, but just keeps everything keeps blowing up in his face. And
Yeah.
so it's kind of a really fun story about these two brothers who end up. Um, I don't want to ruin it too much, but they end up becoming like sort of drug lords and like
Okay.
running a sort of against their knowledge and will. Like they end up
Okay.
running a big drug ring in the country. So
Mhm.
that's a pretty fun story to tell. Um, that one is definitely going for sure in the fall, so that'll be exciting on a new Hulu platform called Onyx.
Okay.
Um,
Awesome.
and I haven't announced it yet, but a South Asian series that by Jhumpa Lahiri, who I adore their books so much. So that's going to be really exciting, and hopefully Netflix will announce that soon and say yes, we are doing a series based on one of her books. So
Oh,
I
that's
think all of
amazing.
her books, so everyone should just read all of them. But that's super exciting. And then a movie, like a really fun, just comedy horror movie with Margot Robbie's company, is probably up next for Amazon, and that's just like fun feminist like comedy horror. That'll be awesome.
Amazing.
Just
Yeah.
hitting all the genres.
Yeah, might as well, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really exciting. Well, I will definitely stay tuned for when
Yeah.
those come out. And as kind of like a final question,
Yeah.
a lot of people watching the show might be South Asian or artists or both.
Yeah.
Do you have any advice for people of South Asian descent or females or just artists in general on
Yeah.
pursuing their dreams or whatever you want to give us advice on?
I think, I mean, some of the best advice I got in film school was that, you have to just keep telling your story, and you have to keep um, getting better at your craft by work. Like, it's a lot of hard work. I think some of us, even at this stage, like, there's this idea that like we'll achieve a certain level of something and then everything will be easier. And that just doesn't happen. Like you just have to want so badly to express the story, and then to do it. Like, don't listen when everyone tells you no, like you can't do it. Like everybody said, you can't make a feature. You certainly can't shoot it this short. You can't shoot it while you're in school. You can't shoot it with, borrowed equipment or barely any film or any, like everything was no, no, no along the way. And I just did not listen to no. Like the thing that was sort of the bane of my childhood to my parents turned out to be a little bit of a superpower as an adult. So I think like there are a lot of us who don't listen to the no's, and that turns out to be like a really great quality to have. So, just to keep pushing yourself and keep working. It's a lot of hard work. And it's so worth it because it's so fun and so fulfilling. But you picked the hardest path. You picked acting, which is the hardest path. And yeah, just to keep doing it for the love of it, and keep in classes and keep finding ways to keep expressing yourself. Don't keep waiting around for some big break. That doesn't that happens to like maybe one person, and even then if you dig deep enough you'll find that they really worked super hard, and when that break came they didn't blow it.
Yeah. And I know you were talking about like this idea of acknowledging everyone that came before you and like the people that hold the door open for you. And I just want to end by saying thank you to you, because you have definitely done that for me and so many other people and so many people watching. And I'm just so grateful that you are on my show, and
I'm so grateful to you for doing this show and keeping our voices heard. It's one thing to like do the work, but if people like the show and you're not out there, like, and people don't know you're doing the work, then they don't know to look for it. And there's such a huge like amount of content right now. It's a little bit like shouting into the void when a show comes out on Netflix or something. So it feels like, so important to point to it and to do this and to celebrate all of us and inspire the next generation to come along by what you're doing. So thank you for having me. This has been really fun.
Thank you. It's been such a joy. And thank you everyone who tuned in. Thank you for watching. Go watch Nisha's films if you haven't already.
Yeah, please go watch them.
Absolutely. And stay
tuned.
And
then hopefully one day you'll see like Ishika and I in the same, like I'll get to say, watch her in this movie, and you'll get to say, watch this movie that Nisha directed. And
oh my God.
It's working.
That's the dream. That's the dream.
That is a dream. That would be amazing.
Truly. Well, thank you so much for being on the show again. Seriously.
Of
what a
course,
dream.
thank you.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Take care.